don't think it was personal. I think it was just that they decided that the parents had done it, and then the longer they stayed on that course, the harder it was for them to back up and say, gee, maybe we should look somewhere else.
This is a deranged person. This is not a person who thinks logically or normally. When people say, well, yeah, but that isn't logical. Nothing is logical in this tragedy. We've been told that what should have happened that morning is, instead of being told just to leave the house and hang around for a few days, we should have been taken immediately to the police department, interviewed separately. That would have protected us and our rights as much as anything. That wasn't done. And that's pretty standard procedure, we're told.
They didn't ask for our clothing until over a year later.
We had to ask for the pictures.
I couldn't even remember what we
had
wore.
on. Near to death as I think I could possibly be and still be alive. You can't function. I mean, people say, well, if that had been me, I'd have been, doing this and that. So, well, maybe you're a better man than I was, but I couldn't. I was crushed in the full sense of that word.
So last time, we were kind of talking a little bit about the JonBenet Ramsey article, JonBenet Ramsey, How the Investigation Got Derailed, Why It Still Matters by Alan Prendergast. And that was updated, an article updated November 30th of 2024, originally published in 2014, obviously talking about or walking through the early hours of 1996, December 26th of 1996, day JonBenet was reported missing and the immediate actions taken. From there, last time I was sort of unpacking how the case shifted from the kidnapping to the homicide. That was the first thing we started off with. The moment when basically it goes to a homicide when, you find the body, and that sort of changed everything. And what I was pointing out was that John and Patsy didn't come in for real police interviews. And we're not talking about what they were talking about in the Larry King interview, where they're saying, we came in for blood and hair samples, but, come in for a real interview. They didn't come in for real interviews until like 4 months later, and how they leaned on their lawyers early on while sort of, I don't want to say hiding behind excuses of grief. I want to say they while seeming to be grief stricken, I'll say that. But the way that they handled it seemed, I'll say the way that they handled it seemed more optional. It's an option for me to come in. It's an option for me to discuss my daughter's death with you. And the option is based on whether or not you're nice to me. You need to be nice to me for me to give you answers. If you play nice with me, then, we might be able to talk. But unless you play nice with me, then, stay out of my way. So I talked about how the intruder theory doesn't seem to hold. You have really no real evidence was left behind. And somehow you have a small amount of DNA that was there. And that's questionable traces of DNA left in her underwear. And you have no prints, no solid trail. It's almost phantom-like we've been saying, like many of you have been saying now and for years in the past. So basically, if a person wasn't wearing gloves, should have been more DNA. So if they were wearing gloves, how did we get any DNA at all? So which way are we going is the kind of the deal. So then got into the Whites, Fleet and Priscilla White, who were once close friends of the Ramseys. At first, they believed in the innocence of John and Patsy. But when lawyers got involved and the Ramseys started pointing fingers at basically all of their friends, everyone else, that support that Fleet and Priscilla had for John and Patsy seemed to really kind of crack and say, well, wait a minute, something's not right here. And so you have later on, I described a little bit later on how, and we'll kind of mention the story here today, how Fleet and Priscilla still trying to help Patsy and and John with their image as they made an appearance on CNN, while still sort of slowly realizing or recognizing that, we really don't have a friendship anymore. I thought we had a friendship. And it's kind of that case to where you get into a space with somebody and you just kind of really realize, I know over the past several months that we've been drifting apart, but this really is the end of our friendship. And so they saw the Ramseys acting more like a PR firm. Is this what how Fleet and Priscilla felt, rather than grieving parents? And then finally, I went in on that pineapple, where Patsy and John sort of danced around the question, denying feeding it to her and suggesting that she was sound asleep, but couldn't explain how it ended up in her digestive tract. They gave sort of these half-baked answers, sort of insinuating maybe someone else fed it to, maybe someone else, some stranger. I think, as Lou said, maybe a stranger fed it to her, and John said, "Yeah, that's crazy. I should be asking answers from you, you know." And but anyways, that was the insinuation. But they didn't give any real names or any plausible theories as to that. They just kind of, John specifically, just kind of let Lou just, you know, spin around and try to figure it out, is really what happened. And didn't come up with anything. And so that's kind of what bothered me the most. And then sort of they had all this access to lawyers, experts, forensic resources, but really didn't even bother to ask real questions. They didn't act like parents trying to solve a murder. It more so seemed like they acted like people trying to avoid accountability. And I don't say that to say that they're guilty. I say that to say that there seemed to be a focus on protecting them as parents rather than trying to solve. When they asked Patsy about the pathologist and other, maybe did you guys, connect with other medical experts on this? And Patsy said no. But then they got to the sort of a certain part of the interview to where Patsy started asking the questions that you should have been asking, sort of asking, well, where was the pineapple in her digestive tract? And about what time did they estimate that, she may have died? Or Tom Haney was like, well, wouldn't you like to know? Wouldn't you like to know? And so I want to kind of start back here. I was, same article. And I left off with a pretty interesting point that I've been kind of wanting to get to, if I can get my fingers under my notebook. And the point to where we have one interest they didn't share, though, was child beauty pageants. And where we left off was we talked about the pineapple, but we were kind of sort of going into a place to where we were still talking about the Ramsey friendship kind of breaking away, the Ramsey and Fleet White friendship sort of breaking away, and they were breaking away from one another. And even though the Ramseys were there to kind of help, this you start to see more about the breakage. And Alan sort of tries to tell it from Fleet's angle. And so the next point I have is that one interest that they didn't share, though, was child beauty pageants. Priscilla found she had to bite her tongue sometimes around Patsy, a former Miss West Virginia, over the latter's interest in transforming JonBenet into a pageant princess. All the makeup and the costumes, the hair bleaching, the whole showbiz treatment of a little girl who was still wetting her bed. Priscilla considered it unhealthy and even gave Patsy a book, Surviving Ophelia, that dealt with how to prepare girls for the turmoil of adolescence. Judith Phillips mentioned something to the effect. She said to Nidra, Patsy's mom, what if JonBenet doesn't want to do this? And then Nidra was essentially like, she has no choice. That's it. John and Patsy seemed to indicate that there was some level of competitiveness, like JonBenet was just racking them up, getting all these medals and these trophies, and JonBenet was just enjoying it. But, a few videos back, we sort of examined some of JonBenet's facial expressions that show JonBenet wasn't enjoying this at all. Far from it. Now, I'm not here to say that JonBenet never enjoyed performing. I'm not trying to say that. because some people can argue, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. That you just caught her in a moment of disappointment or weakness or whatever. And it's like, I mean, to me, I don't know if she really, I think there's an element of it she liked, but when sometimes once you get into the fullness of it, and this is not you wanting to quit everything, because my dad didn't like when we would quit things, but sometimes it's not, you quitting things. Sometimes it's just, I genuinely don't like this. And the whole process, it's one thing maybe to sing and be a singer, but it's quite another thing to be a professional musician, right? Whether you sing, whether you play guitar or piano or any other instrument, if you do it in your spare time, you can just sit down and plop down and just strum a little bit and go on about your business. However, if you do it professionally, it's a different level of commitment, right? You have to get up, you have to make sure your chords are tuned. You have to make sure your guitar is tuned. You have to have all of the professional equipment to be on stage, especially if you're going to do it at a high level. You got to call around. You got to book gigs. You got to show up. You got to excite the crowd. You got to practice before you get there, and all of these things. And you got to meet with the doorman to make sure that they're getting their share and you're getting your share, and all of the band is getting paid what they're getting paid, and and you're having to talk to the fans afterwards and make sure everybody's happy and thank people for coming out. And in some places they want you to sell tickets if you're going to play there and stuff like that. So there's a lot to do with not only just playing and being a creative and a musician, but there's also the administration, the business administration of it, that sometimes really deters people from, it becomes a barrier from people really going on the professional side because of the administration part. And it could have been the case that JonBenet didn't want to do it. And so, not to mention with all of the things that JonBenet was dealing with. And that's kind of where we pick up here. Priscilla was looking and she's saying, friend, I don't know if this is for your daughter. She's still wetting the bed. And it's interesting because Alan seems to have gone out and talked to Priscilla and gotten Priscilla's feedback on this. And Priscilla was open and honest about this. I'm assuming Priscilla was open and honest and saying, I was Patsy's closest friend. I didn't like it. I'll be honest with you. I didn't like what they were doing with JonBenet, doing all of this, putting all of this pressure on a 6-year-old. And so she gave Patsy this book, Surviving Ophelia. And so I wanted to take a look at it. So I kind of pulled it up here on Amazon. I pulled it up here on Amazon. It's $11 in paperback. You can also get it on audio book, hardcover, MP3 CD. And I'm not sort of recommending it to you in any way, but this was written by, looks like PhD, Cheryl De La Sega. And basically, the book it's entitled Surviving Ophelia. Mothers share their wisdom in navigating the tumultuous teenage years. Written October '02, I believe, or October '02. I'm guessing is when this was updated or whatnot. If I look at the details, publication date 102. I'm guessing she had another copy or something like that. But anyways, this is supposedly the book, and unless I have the wrong one, this is supposedly the book that Patsy was given. And so just to kind of read a little bit of it, and this is by authors Kim Hess and others. Why are the teen years fraught with crisis for so many girls? Why do so many mother-daughter relationships deteriorate drastically at this time? When her own teenage daughter began to spiral out of control, therapist Cheryl De La Sega, PhD, launched a nationwide search to find answers and hope. In this inspiring, compassionate book, De La Sega shares the strength and the wisdom of mothers who have seen their daughters through the tumult of adolescence. Drawing on the experiences of scores of mothers and daughters, De La Sega takes a hard look at the lives of girls in crisis, once happy, carefree children who are now struggling with eating disorders, unplanned pregnancies, substance abuse, and severe mental problems. These are stories of girls on the edge and mothers who are trying everything to save them. Yet, even in the most desperate situations, De La Sega hears the same clear message. The key to survival is the support and the understanding of others going through the same thing. Surviving Ophelia is a book that provides the community of that mothers of troubled teenage girls need more than anything. Powerful and heartfelt, this book captures both the pain and the strength of mothers who are living with the daily challenge of raising teenage daughters today. And so, looking specifically at Dr. De La Sega, she's written, I think one of her most popular books is Mean Girls Grown Up, adult women who are still queen bees, middle bees, and afraid to bees. That's kind of clever. She has, of course, we just saw Mean Girls Grown Up. That I think that might be useful because you're talking about people, and this is what we say when we study behavior. You're talking about people who they have a certain, even though their age says one thing, their mindset says another. And even though you've grown up, you start paying bills, you start having children, you get married or you don't, or what have you, um, and you start taking on the adult cares of life, your mindset is still tied back to an earlier time when you were at the top of your life, when you were at sort of like this pinnacle of your life. And that's very important. Sort of like psychological regression, I might call it. You're at the pinnacle of your life, but 16 was a great year for me. And so I sort of stay at 16 because that's when 16 was the best time for me. And so she has another book, 12 Strategies That Will End Female Bullying, Girls' Wars, 12 Strategies That Will End Female Bullying, of course, Surviving Ophelia, Mothers Share Their Wisdom, Forced to Be, Family, A Guide for Living with Sinister, so on and so forth. And so she has these books in which Priscilla turns over to her and says, hey, maybe you might need this. And so Priscilla seemed, in my notes I have, Priscilla seemed to have concern over Patsy Ramsey moving JonBenet Ramsey into pageantry when JonBenet couldn't even stop wetting the bed. So, and obviously, as we looked at the Amazon book, kind of prematurely trying to sort of force JonBenet, and this is talking about a Patsy in my notes. It seems as if, let me say it like that, seems as if Patsy was kind of prematurely trying to force JonBenet to grow up, knowing other things were not resolved, such as the sicknesses and the bedwetting and stuff like that. Those things are not resolved, but you're trying to go to Dr. Buff to get these things resolved. You're trying to go talk to Dr. Buff to sort of see his perspective, and can you prescribe anything? Can we get this knocked out? Can we get this thing taken care of? Because she has to perform, and it's like, well, hold on, Patsy. She's not good, doing good. She's not well, and so that seems to have never been addressed, and so uh, JonBenet's hygiene was in question, and possibly her confidence. So just looking at the bedwetting alone, it could be the case that at 6 years old, her confidence for herself, her confidence was in question. So she's like, Mom, I know you're pushing me to do this, but I'm not really ready to do that just yet. I don't know how to tell you no. I probably can't tell you no, but you're telling me that, hey, I've always wanted a daughter, and I've always wanted my daughter to be on the pageant scene, and you're going to have to do it. You're my only daughter, and this is going to fall on you. Now, sometimes as parents, when you want your children to do things, it breaks your heart because they don't follow in those footsteps. But at some point in time, you do some reflection, and you grieve that process, and you grieve that part of what you thought your kids were going to be, and you say, I love my kids. I love my kid or my kids, and it is what it is. I wanted them to be this, but they don't have to. I still love them, and if you ever do want to come back, if you ever do want to come back, though, it's still there. But you kind of grieve that part of your life. So it seems as if, though, if Patsy Ramsey, if we'll say if, uh, it seems as though that uh, if Patsy Ramsey covered it up, sort of these questions about that maybe JonBenet had about herself, the questions about confidence and maybe the hygiene issues that she had, Patsy Ramsey seems to have covered that up and said, it's okay, we'll just look over that and look past that. Uh, so it's no surprise here, then, if we see evidence of a cover up, in this case, something so small, something so insignificant, well, I don't want to call it small and insignificant, but something that's not death, it's not murder, that's not as serious. Um, if you're willing to cover this up, and we talk about tracking behaviors all the time, if you're willing to cover something like this up, even though somebody tried to warn you ahead of time, said, hey, I see you going down a certain path with your kids. Let me stop you. Let me warn you. Let me try to see if I can't say as a friend. Um, I don't know if you need to be going down that path. Instead of listening, you say, I got it. I got my own way that I want to do this. So if we see you cover up here, then it's possible, saying it's possible, that that could be the first thing that you do at other times. We could see you try to cover up at other times. Just a possibility. Okay? Go to the next part. On December 26th, just hours after finding the body, Fleet was surprised to get a call from Mike Bynum, an attorney and Ramsey family friend, who'd offered to help John and Patsy find appropriate representation and had fended off initial police attempts to formally interview the parents. The next day, Fleet had his first interview with the police detectives, and then, at Bynum's request, went to the lawyer's office late that afternoon, where he was introduced to an attorney from the prestigious law firm of Haddon Morgan and Foreman, as well as a private investigator. Team Ramsey wanted its own debriefing on what Fleet had seen and done. And so basically, Fleet says, the cops are calling me in. I am going to go speak to the police and see what they want, see what this is all about, and I'm going to give them what I've seen. I'm going to give them my statement. You remember, I think on the Ashley Flowers interview, when she did an interview directly with John Ramsey, and it was on the Crime Junkies podcast. If you're looking for it, it's on her channel. I can't remember the name of it, but Ashley Flowers, Crime Junkies podcast, interviewed John Ramsey, and I think, if I'm remembering correctly, she was asking, hey, what led to that breakup? I could be misremembering that she asked that question, but she kind of asked what led to that breakup. And John said, I don't know, man. Seems like the cops got a hold of him and they were talking to him. And then all of a sudden, after they got a hold to him, he was never the same. And so Fleet is going in and saying, man, I'm talking to the cops. I want to see what's up and everything. And then he gets a call from Haddon Morgan, and he gets a call from Mike Bynum to come into Haddon Morgan and Foreman. We know that this is a tactic from Haddon Morgan and Foreman. One of the things that they do, according to Haddon, they like to call you in, any witness. They know that they don't have any rights, or the witness doesn't have any responsibility to talk to you as the defense. They don't have to talk to you. And the witness list doesn't have to be revealed until discovery. And so Fleet, if he is working with the prosecution, doesn't have to talk to you, doesn't have to tell you what he said. All Haddon Morgan and Foreman can do is reach out and sort of send a letter to these witnesses that have been talked to the police, and say, would you please come in for an interview? And they can basically just try to guilt trip them into speaking with them by saying, you talk to the police, but it's not fair for you to talk to the police and tell the police certain things, and we don't know. In the interest of fairness, you should tell us what you said. And essentially, I have here in my notes, Fleet was summoned to Haddon Morgan and Foreman's office after his police interview so they could know exactly what he told police. And so Mike Bynum facilitated this, and there is this underlying motive here, it seems, to position oneself to pivot with every angle. What do I mean by that? To pivot with every angle. What we're looking at is an active defense team, not a passive one. This team is actively trying to prove it was not John or Patsy. With what evidence, though? Because this is brand new. A day after Fleet is going and telling them what he knows. And so there's really no evidence out there. But we have this team of lawyers that are already actively trying to defend Patsy and John from anything, from hearsay, from what someone might say, or to just try to essentially, in the early stages, pattern their defense around what's being said. so that whatever Fleet says, it seems that they can move with it. And they can say, so you told the police this. Now I need to know. Now I know what I need to tell police. So if you told police that we went down there at 6 a.m., then that means that if I'm either going to reject that interpretation and say, no, we didn't go down there at 6 a.m. Maybe he's mistaken. We went down there at 6:10, 6:15 or something like that. And you can already start to let him know whether or not you're going to call him a liar or not, whatever. Or you can let him know, or you can know ahead of time if you're going to try to impeach him as a witness. What does that mean? For some of you who may not be familiar with the term, and we've talked about this before, so some of you are familiar with this. Impeaching and some of you are attorneys, so you're well aware of what I'm talking about. Impeaching the witness means that we're trying to get you out of here. You cannot witness in this case because my job here is to find any way to discredit you, so that the court says this person is not trustworthy. Whatever they had to say, they cannot say it in court because it's not going to be trustworthy. The court will not believe them, and so therefore we cannot put them in front of a jury, and so therefore the witness has been impeached because they won't be allowed in court. So here in the Had Morgan informant playbook, they have several options. Bring you in and we craft our story around what you're saying in some way, shape, or form. We try to discredit you, or we agree with your story. So we have different things that we want to play with from the very beginning. And it's important, if we're going to try to structure and strategize and create a defense, that we understand all of the key components and understand what everyone is saying. And that's why it becomes important for none of the friends to talk to the media, because I know you're trying to help. But if you go out and you talk to the media and you just say whatever that you want to say, you could, by accident, damage what the Ramseys are trying to do. And we can't have that. So before you say anything, speak with us and let's all get on the same page. Now, I'll be honest, that kind of gets in the way of truth. Just a little bit. I'm be honest with you. That kind of gets in the way of truth. That kind of gets in the way of truth. Excuse me. That kind of gets in the way of truth and free-flowing dialogue and free-flowing testimony and interviews, because you're supposed to be able to bring someone in and have them tell their full, unadulterated story. But Patsy and John don't seem to want that. You filter your story through us and then say what happened. Well, they wouldn't need to filter their story through you because they weren't there. So there's honestly nothing to tell, right? They honestly have nothing to say, because guess what? They weren't there during the nighttime hours. You didn't call anybody. So this kidnapping happened and it wasn't on their watch. So if you call Fleet White over, Fleet White is not going to be he's not going to be able to say anything except for, well, I went downstairs and I checked in the basement, and honestly, man, I didn't see anything. And this young lady, this little girl was one of the best. She was a great friend to my kids, and it's just a tragedy to see this. We just saw her yesterday. That's all Fleet can say. Judith Phillips wasn't there, so she can say nothing but, this is a great family. They wouldn't hurt a fly, and I've been friends of the Ramseys for a long time, and this is just a tragedy. She can't say anything except that. Pam, Nidra, Don, Polly, they're all going to say that. Right? Jeff, they're all going to say that. Because they have legitimately nothing to go off of. But if you believe that there was a slip up, if you believe that you did something, or they saw something that they shouldn't have seen, then you would have to have them come in and say, hold on. Maybe if you don't think they saw something, but maybe if you think they know something that they shouldn't know. Maybe you acted in a way, maybe some of your behaviors, maybe some of your behaviors came across as suspicious in certain situations. And so they could say something, or maybe you did something around them and they were like, well, dang it, they weren't supposed to say that, but that might lead the cops to stay on our trail a little bit more, because we're concerned and we're scared that maybe what you're going to say might not lead the cops away from us, but might it tend to lead the cops more toward us. And if I don't like your questions, if I don't like what the cops are asking you, then I'm gonna have to try to intersect that. And if you decide, I can't control you, I can't make you do anything. But if you decide that you want to talk to the cops without me authorizing that, then you just know, me and you are done. And essentially, really what it was is that as soon as Fleet spoke to the cops, they were done. As soon as you decide to go out and speak to the cops without me, you're done. Because you're supposed to be protecting me and not anyone else. I also noted here, um, and this is good, I believe. So they're active in trying to protect John and Patsy in the early stages, even not knowing anything, um, so that they can get a sense of what's important in the case, what's going to be important, what's going to shape up, what directions the police might go based on what they're being told. Uh, and essentially, what the lawyers were trying to do is they're trying to look at different aspects, especially at the beginning of the case, when they don't really have much information to go off of, except what the uh, uh, what the client is telling them. They're probably going to go, and you're going to see clearly. Um, it's a little easy to see if you're paying attention, but you see clearly the direction that attorneys are going just by, or what they're thinking, just by what they do and just by what they talk about. For example, um, just basically by what they defend against. For example, cell phone and credit card records. You're not getting that. Um, Lie detection stuff, uh, family accusations, Burke accusations, divide and conquer methodologies. When they start coming in and mentioning those things earlier on in the case, then you know that these are things that the client has revealed to them, things that they feel the need to respond to and respond to in a very aggressive manner to try to stomp them out and say, well, no, this, we don't even want this to get started. That's why you would hire a PR firm to kind of help you control some of that narrative, because we don't even want that to get started. We don't even want that to spread. Because if it's not just what happens in the courtroom, because if there's external pressure on John and Patsy or even Burke, because news reporters don't care. News reporters have been shown to be pretty vicious. They don't care nothing about. Look, I'm not trying to say I'm not trying to say news reporters are bad, but sometimes news reporters can be unethical, um, or they can do things that seem unethical or immoral, by sort of attacking you in a sense when you come out of the restaurant or something like that, and they're in your face and you don't like it. That could be something that you get frustrated with, right? And so, and you know, they might approach your children, and that's a little bit uh, kind of touching on the gray area, man. Don't approach my kids, man. Stay away from my kids. But while police are not supposed to be doing that without the parents' permission, reporters might come up, and they did come up to Burke and ask Burke questions, and that might expose the Ramseys. And so, what they're trying to do is defend against these things. And if I catch Burke or John or Patsy at a weird time, your behavior might reflect somebody who is guilty, or your behavior might give off suspicious. And I want to stomp out any in you based on what you might even ask me. I might give because I'm in the moment and I don't know to say no comment, no response. I'm working with my attorneys. We'll have our day in court. Instead of saying that, I might pop off at the mouth and say, "Well, where did you get that?" They might come up and be like, "There was a story in the newspaper. The National Enquirer showed that there was, pineapple in her stomach. What do you say about that? And that, you gave her pineapple before bed. What do you say about that?" And instead of saying no comment, you might respond by saying, Well, who said that? Who said I gave my daughter pineapple? Man, you know what? Yeah, I did feed my daughter pineapple that night. And so what? You weren't supposed to say that. And so I gotta go with the PR and stomp it out before it gets too bad. And so that's why the lawyers are being so aggressive in the media to kind of shape the narrative and protect their client in that way, which I respect. I get it. I'm not even mad at that. I understand that. So, but what they try to defend against will give you a pretty good indication of what they talked about with the client in my mind, what I think. And so, another thing that I note, when you get these attorneys involved and you start using lawyers heavily, especially in the way that they used in Lynn Wood. When Lynn Wood was hired, they knew that it was going to be more about defamation lawsuits and slander and libel and all such as that. And I say that, I bring that up to say that money becomes, as we know, money becomes a driving force, not just in the hands of the Ramseys, but with how they can manipulate it or move it or use it in terms of silence and quieting people. So I say that to say that if I can take your money, essentially, I don't need an NDA or anything of the sort because I take your livelihood. So you're sort of coerced in the silence, is what it seems like. And what I mean by that is the way they came at Steve Thomas or the way they came at CBS for certain things. Steve Thomas quit his job. So this book deal is going to be huge for him. If you bring uh, uh, um, if you bring a lawsuit against Steve Thomas, and Steve Thomas ends up having to pay, I think I feel like somewhere I think it was either Chris Wolf or Steve Thomas that they actually had to pay or reimburse the Ramseys. I think it was Chris Wolf. According to the court documents, had to reimburse the Ramseys, I think about $38,000 for taking them to court. So he had to, the whole court fees and all such as that. He had, I think he was supposed to, according to what I was seeing in the court documents and the indication of such. I don't know if he ever paid it or what have you, but he was supposed to reimburse them, I think like 38 grand or something like that, according to the court documents and stuff like that. But basically, if you don't have the money to hire an attorney, if you don't have the money to keep that attorney and retain that attorney and defend yourself, or if you do have the money to hire an attorney, we're going to try to take you deep, and we're going to try to throw everything at you, including the kitchen sink. And the point of us doing that as the Ramsey squad could be because we want to get you to shut up. And so it's not that you don't have anything to say, but it's just that I don't have the money to fight this battle. And so by default, I got to be quiet. If I don't want my money, if I don't want my money or my livelihood taken from me, if I don't want all my wages garnished or what have you, I got to be quiet. And that could act as effectively as an NDA, if the Ramseys are going to use that to kind of say, be quiet. And so we move on to the next point, which I believe is the reading is pretty long. I feel like I'm doing pretty good. So I might actually get through a little bit more. Okay. I want to read this though. The next point. The situation deteriorated further when the Whites flew to Atlanta for JonBenet's funeral. They were expected to stay at the home of Rod Westmoreland, John Ramsey's financial advisor, but felt ill at ease among the Ramseys' Atlanta friends and alarmed at the direction things seemed to be heading. Now, I was in one of the forums this morning, and I saw somebody seem to be able to interpret from the report, from the police report. When you go look at the police report, it's kind of redacted in certain areas, and they were able to look and see Rod Westmoreland's name in the police report, and I was like, how'd you do that? And they were also able to see Dr. Buff and Mike Bynum and stuff like that. And I was like, man, how'd you see that? So I don't know. If that's the case, if that's what happened, wow. that you were able to kind of crack that and kind of dig and get beyond that redaction. That's actually pretty awesome. But anyways, I just thought that was an interesting tidbit. They were expected to stay at the home of Rod Westmoreland, John Ramsey's financial advisor, but the Whites felt ill at ease among the Ramseys' Atlanta friends and alarmed at the direction things seemed to be heading. I'd never been to the South before, Priscilla says, because they're both from California. It was very different from Colorado or California, very pretentious. Maids, everybody was drinking champagne. Come on now. Come on. Don't do that. In the South, come on. We don't be doing all that. Some of us have maids and stuff like that, and we do drink a little champagne. But come on, stop acting like, we're just walking around high class. Not everybody's doing that. So, trying to make us look, stop. Stop. Anyways, I got a few qualms about that, Priscilla. So everybody was drinking champagne. I finally looked at the woman who was supposed to be our hostess and said, "We can't stay here. You don't know what we've just been through, and you're worried about whether we're using your baccarat crystal glasses." So all of a sudden, we were the crazy ones. And here's where the story start to unravel a little bit. Several accounts of the trip to Atlanta have claimed that there was a blow up between Fleet White and John Ramsey. Some have even hinted that the meltdown had something to do with JonBenet's murder. The Ramseys' own account in their book, The Death of Innocence, doesn't go that far, but it does portray the Whites as unduly agitated and Fleet's behavior in particular as erratic, unreasonable, and vaguely threatening. Vaguely threatening, they say, but vaguely threatening. But Patsy and Burke and I think Nidra are going and hiding down below in the basement. Vaguely threatening, but y'all went and hid in the basement, and John had to go and stand up to Fleet. What you doing here? Trying to confront me and my wife. What y'all doing? And my kids, I got my kid back there. You better stay out of here. That's what they're trying to stop it. So, but now it's vaguely threatening. And the Whites' version of what happened supported, I'm getting excited, supported to a significant degree by contemporaneous notes and conversations with detectives is quite different. There was no blow up, they insist, just a somewhat testy conversation between Fleet and Westmoreland, who took him aside and told him to back off. The Ramseys had lawyers, private investigators, and a crisis management firm to look after them now. Westmoreland explained, and they were planning on staying in Atlanta. So here we see that even though John and Patsy would return to Colorado, they were already, that call to the pilot to try to get out of town was not it wasn't just a coincidence that, I think I might try to. No, it wasn't. You made up your mind, and that's crazy. Think about that. On the day of, in the afternoon, on December 26th, before you left the house, you did not make up your mind to leave and stay with friends and stay out of the house for a second. You had already made up your mind to move out of Colorado. What? Why? You had already made up your mind from that point. And Rod is telling you, stay out of it, Fleet. You're no longer needed. And Fleet is like, wait a minute, I'm the only one who's done an interview. What do you mean? Stay out of it, Fleet. They have their lawyers and they have their attorney and their PR firm and their investigators handling it now. We don't need you. Chill out a little bit. Why? Because I'm telling them to talk to the cops? For what? And that's what Priscilla was saying. You don't know what we just been through. You weren't there when Patsy was just boo-hooing and bawling her eyes out. And we had to comfort her. You weren't there walking around with John, sort of walking around that basement, trekking through the basement to run up on a lifeless JonBenet. You weren't there. I was. You didn't have to comfort him. I did. And now you trying to tell me to chill out. And basically, John and Patsy were already trying to leave Colorado. They were already trying to move out of Colorado. And so probably what was discussed with the Steins was that, um, look here, uh, we ain't gonna be here long. It's just gonna be a little bit. Give us like 5, 6 months. We ain't gonna be here long. We're actually trying to move. And what that tells you is that they were having conversations about moving because the Steins didn't just up and move one day, and the Ramseys were, and they were like, oh, and the Ramseys were like, oh yeah, we're moving. And then the Steins were like, you know what? We'll move as well. You actually have to put your house on the market. And that means you actually have to start thinking about moving and thinking about how you want to uproot your family and thinking about if John is going to offer you a position at JLEO North America, you got to think about whether or not you're going to make enough money to buy a house in Atlanta. Because Atlanta, according to where you guys might stay, can be pretty expensive. And so that's not a decision that you make lightly. I'm just going to uproot my family from this, maybe I don't know what the housing prices were at the time. I'll say $300,000. I'm not going to just uproot my family from this $300,000 home to this other $300,000 home. I'm not going to do it. Oh, let's say 500,000. We're not going from $500,000 over here to $500,000 over there. It just don't happen. You have to do that with consideration. Even though they support the Ramseys, Susan and Glenn have to discuss together, how much do we believe in the Ramseys and the Ramsey story, and how much do we, because it's one thing to be friends with the Ramseys and bid them farewell when they leave Colorado and say, we love you, friend, and we know that this is the best option for you, but however, we're going to stay here in Colorado. They made a conscious effort to go with John and Patsy. So that means that they had to stop. They had to hire movers and go. They had to say, not only because I think Burke and Doug went to different schools. So while Burke is in a private school, Burke was in a private school, I don't know where Doug was. While Burke is going and being sheltered and protected in a private school, I don't know where Doug was. Doug had to, because they were going to the same school in Colorado. But I say that because I don't find Doug in Burke's yearbook when they went to Georgia. So I'm confused by that. If y'all moved, I would think that y'all moved to the same area. And thus y'all would probably go to the same school. But it doesn't seem like y'all did. So they had already planned to move to Atlanta. I got really ticked off, Fleet says. I said, you do that, and it's not going to go anybody's way. And it's not going to go anybody's way. And I told Priscilla, we've got to get out of here and go talk to John. The Whites visited with Jeff Ramsey, John's brother, then tracked John down at the home of Patsy's parents, Don and Nedra Paw. The conversation was passionate but hardly menacing, the White said. We just laid out a case for John about why he needed to go back to Boulder. Fleet recalls, I told him, what you do in the next 24 hours is going to define the rest of your life. You need to talk to the cops. Patsy needs to talk to the cops. We all need to do that and find out what happened to JonBenet. Ramsey listened calmly, leaving the room a couple times to take phone calls. The Whites assumed he was speaking with his attorneys. Patsy was nowhere to be seen, right? Because she said she went and hid in the basement with Burke. She went and hid in the basement with Burke, acting like there was people were robbing the place. Patsy was nowhere to be seen. At one point, John returned and announced that he was going to offer a $50,000 reward for information about his daughter's death. And then Priscilla said, "You're going to sound like OJ." And by the end of the session, Ramsey was assuring the Whites that he and Patsy would return to Boulder Far from being incensed, the Ramseys invited the couple to brunch at the Paws on New Year's Day. Um, so apparently, this happened either prior to the funeral or at the funeral. Maybe prior because, or maybe after, maybe the evening of the funeral because Fleet, if he maybe he held it together because Fleet um was one of the pallbearers for JonBenet. He was one of the pallbearers, so maybe they put that behind them. But anyways, they were invited to brunch on New Year's Day. Now, the Ramseys ended by assuring the Whites that they would return to Boulder. They said that the next day on CNN. They said, yeah, we're going to go back. We're going to go to Boulder and we're going to talk to the police and we're going to tell them everything. But they never made it. And they blamed it on their lawyers and said that, we couldn't get together. The DA didn't want to do it. Or they didn't want to have the DA there. And so we could never, the cops didn't want the DA there, so we could never get together and make it happen. That's what Mike Bynum says. The Whites arrived and learned that John and Patsy were scheduled to appear on CNN later that day. And that's New Year's Day. So they came over so the next day comes, I guess, they come over for brunch and they're talking with Patsy and John, but they find out that Patsy and John have an interview scheduled with CNN that day. So again, this is something that John and Patsy have been working on for a little bit, maybe a couple of days prior. They've been working on giving an interview to CNN. This is not just a spur of the moment thing. This was planned because when you sit there and you have to say the same thing, as we know that John and Patsy were mouthing things to one another, or John was mouthing things to Patsy, we know that there seems to have been a level of coordination of answers, at least in terms of PR. And it might indicate that well before they left town, they were in conversations with Haddon Morgan and Foreman and their media person and their media personnel to speak with CNN. And so this was their way of releasing, and maybe they had no intention of speaking to the police anytime soon. It was just basically all on their timing. They couldn't really tell you, but they know that they're going to speak with CNN because it's already planned. And you have people who can call CNN and say, "Hey, we got this JonBenet Ramsey story that's going to hit the news, and we want to release it to you. We want to control the narrative here to you." Why would you do that? Because if we tell the police and it gets reported through some sort of media release or a press release, then writers are going to be able to write whatever they want to write. But if I go on CNN and tell people what I think happened, then that's what people will believe. Priscilla helped Patsy, who was still heavily medicated, get ready for her close-up, urging her not to wear her diamond ring and mink coat. John Ramsey would later claim that it was Fleet White's idea for the parents to appear on national television and defend themselves. Fleet denies it, saying he was intent on getting the Ramseys to cooperate with the police. Priscilla remembers the two men sitting together on the couch that morning before you did the interview. Priscilla remembers the two men sitting together on the couch that morning for brunch, talking earnestly and holding hands for several minutes before the Whites left for the airport. And that was the last conversation of any substance the Whites ever had with John and Patsy Ramsey. Fleet saw them once at church after they returned. There are conflicting versions of that meeting too, but that was it. The Whites had been exiled from the inner circle. So I have my notes on it. Okay, I'm doing good on time. The fallout between the Whites, I have in my notes, and the Ramseys seemed to be a little calmer from Fleet's angle. Fleet says he passionately asked John to speak with police. and that the next 24 hours would define the rest of your life. Of course, Patsy was nowhere to be found. Fleet says he was staying with a Ramsey friend, getting annoyed by the uppityness and the lack of focus on JonBenet in a time of tragedy. Fleet simply asks where he could find John, leaves the friend's house, talking about Rod. He leaves Rod's house, goes to Jeff's house, and then gets wind that John and Patsy are at Patsy's parents' house, and then he goes over there. They plead with John. John says, okay, I'll do it. Makes sense. And then they're invited to brunch. They get the Ramseys ready for their close-up on CNN, even though they disagree. So here we are. We see that Fleet and Priscilla, like we said before, we alluded to before, even though they disagree, they're still being friends. That's pretty consistent, even though they disagree with the pageantry. I'm just going to give you this book, and I hope you read it. But John and Patsy are getting all Hollywood on Fleet. What it seems to be the case, they're getting all Hollywood on Fleet and Priscilla. Well, we're just going to do what we're going to do. Because Fleet and Priscilla come that morning and they plead with them and they beg them, please don't do this. And then John wants to say, well, it's actually Fleet's idea. How would it be Fleet's idea? Fleet would have had to tell you to do that before you guys left Colorado for you to even catch wind of that. Or he would have had to told you to have done that as soon as you guys got to Atlanta. And because he wasn't even at the house with you. He was at somebody else's house. How would he recommend that to you? Couldn't even find you. He didn't know where you were. So how could he find you? That's what I'm saying. How could he tell you that in enough time for you to go then and say, oh, yeah, you know what, this great idea. Let's go talk to CNN and see if we can't get on TV with this. I mean, because that's funny. And maybe you guys can help me. You guys, I thought there were news cameras there the night of. That's what I thought. There were news cameras there the night of. At any point in time, John and Patsy could have stopped and said, this is just a horrible tragedy that happened to my daughter. We're going to get justice for my daughter. We're going to find the people who did this. Y'all could have gave an interview then. But you didn't. To these local Boulder, Colorado reporters. But you didn't. You waited till you got on the big stage, CNN in Atlanta. Popping. One of the biggest cities in the nation. Most populated cities in the nation. That's where you decided to do it. That's where you decided to broadcast. Where the cops had to jump on a plane to get to you. Clever, clever, clever. But anyways, even though they disagreed, they were still there to help you, still there to be a friend, right? So this is the second time we see that. Far from the hiding extravaganza that Patsy Ramsey described, John and Fleet talked about their issues and held hands as they worked through it because it was different from what the lawyers were trying to say happened. And it's different from what the lawyers were trying to portray. No, man, I just want you to do the right thing. That's it. I just want you to do the right thing. Let me move on. Because this is pretty big too. The Ramseys maintained that it was the Whites who broke off contact. For a little while, the Whites continued to receive little notes and cards from the Ramseys, but nothing they regarded as a serious invitation to get together. Priscilla noticed that Patsy's handwriting was different, altered in several respects from what it had been before the death of JonBenet. The appearance of the Ramseys on CNN just 5 days after the murder of their daughter marked the emergence of the case as a lurid, upscale whodunit. One that would send packs of tabloid journalists sniffing around Boulder. It also signaled that this wasn't going to be a conventional criminal probe, but a highly public affair with elaborate campaigns on all sides designed to win favor in the court of public opinion and try to influence the direction of the investigation. I have here in my notes, Priscilla notices that Patsy Ramsey changed her handwriting on later communications between them. And Patsy Ramsey may have tried to disguise her handwriting to the police in later samples. And so, if this was the case, that she was trying to disguise her handwriting, then she was getting a little bit of practice in with Priscilla. So, I can go and I can get a little bit of practice in with Priscilla. I could try to work on it. And this is alleged, this is according to this document. And so, if this is the case, Patsy is saying, okay, I can get a little practice and I can send these little cards and notes and make it seem like we're still on good terms, even though we're not. And I can practice writing in a different sort of style. And Patsy, it's possible that Patsy was doing this cognitively, and she was aware of this um, because I know that they've already come to my house looking for handwriting samples. I know they've already asked me for handwriting samples. So if it becomes the case, and it shows a level of distrust between Patsy and Priscilla, because it's possible I don't trust you. After everything you've done and after everything you said, Patsy is saying I don't trust Priscilla. So I got to switch up my handwriting, because if I write the way that I usually write, they might come ask you, hey, are there any little note cards and whatnot? And that's what I'm saying. If it's police bungling, now I want to be honest with you. On the Bill Curtis, the anatomy of an investigation with Bill Curtis, former FBI agent Ron Walker did say that they did offer more help, extensive help, like trying to send their agents out. He said, man, to the BPD, and the BPD declined. And they said, man, I bet they're kind of looking back now and kicking themselves that they didn't have 58 more agents kind of combing around that place and kind of knocking on doors and going to the neighbors. Even though the BPD said they did a little bit of that, 58 agents, 58 agents wouldn't have hurt. You could have, man, y'all could have done some serious canvassing. And I tell you, if they had the FBI there that day, there would have been nowhere that John could have hidden. There would have been nowhere that he could have gone without an FBI agent being there. Linda Arndt, that would have been the help that Linda was looking for. Linda could have been like, once she said, hey, go downstairs and see what you can find, an FBI agent would have been right there and said, yeah, take me with you. Hey, man, we would have cut to the heart of this matter quick. Because if you would have gone downstairs and you would have tried to report that window was broken, and the FBI agent could have had his notepad and jotting everything down, and then you could have tried to run to the wine cellar, and the FBI agent would have been right there running with you, jotting down everything. So we took 2 steps toward the wine cellar, and then he opened the latch, and then the latch, and then right there we saw the body, documenting everything. That would have helped. Now I do got to give it to them for that. The Boulder police didn't necessarily do a good job there, but I will come back and say, if the police were bungling so bad, and if what Priscilla is saying is true, that Patsy did change her handwriting, then this is just another place in which the police were circling the block. They're getting close. They may not be getting close in that way, but they're getting close to something that makes you say, I don't even trust my friends anymore, my close friends anymore. I don't even trust them anymore. And these are my friends who are like family, but family knows too much about me. So I can't give them ammunition, because I'm afraid that if I tell Priscilla this, Priscilla might rat me out. Priscilla might tell on me. And so even when I'm writing note cards and stuff like that, even when I reveal that to you, I got to change my handwriting. And I'm sort of guessing at this. I got to change my handwriting, because if they come looking for you, which I think they might be like, oh, where'd you get that card from? Or they might call you in to interview, because you've already shown your propensity to want to go in and talk to the cops. If they come in, which makes me wonder, back to the Susan Stein incident, when Fleet was calling about his grandmother, or is calling about his mom, and Susan opened the door, or she came to the door and didn't want to open it because she doesn't run to the cops. But the first thing that Fleet and Priscilla did was run to the cops. So it's a wonder that if Fleet would have known that the cops were at the door, he would have opened the door and said, "Oh, yeah, we're just having a holiday party." Because Fleet and Priscilla are running to the cops. And that's what Patsy is concerned about. Oh, you have a propensity to run to these cops. I don't know if I like that. And so when I write, I might have to disguise my handwriting, because if they come and say, "Hey, Priscilla, got any handwriting samples from Patsy? Maybe little notes or things that she kind of wrote you letters or anything like that?" And Priscilla be like, "Oh, absolutely. Here." And then they might be like, "Thank you. That's what I need." Police bungling. Now, I'm not saying the police did the best job. I'm not saying that. I'm saying they could have definitely accepted some help. But police bungling, huh? They bungled their way right around to scare you from trusting your friends. Bungled your way. They bungled their way right around to getting you to start trying to write different when you wrote letters to your friends. Bungled their way around to that now, didn't they? They didn't bungle too bad, because it's got you acting nervous. Now I gotta write in a different way. When they start to look at your lettering and your style and your font and say, "Oh, that looks like block lettering. That looks like what people like to do when they try to disguise stuff." Uh-oh. You tried to throw me off, but you didn't throw me off good enough. Oh, yeah. Let me move on to my next point. Even as the police struggled to process a crime scene they failed to control, the hunt for evidence began to bog down amid procedural and legal hurdles. It was months before investigators were able to obtain the clothing the Ramseys had worn the night their daughter was killed, and even longer before they could get access to the parents' phone records and credit card bills. I have here in my notes, it took months before police could get access to phone records and credit card bills. Now, according to Steve Thomas's letter, he mentions this. And he says, "Yeah, man, we couldn't even get the DA to kind of, clear that roadblock up for us." At the time, Lou Smith interviewed John Ramsey in 1998. This is in I'm not going to turn there, but this is in the 1998 transcripts. They still had not received access to either of these things, either the phone records or the credit card bills. Now, this is what Lou said in the interview. He said, "We have some of these things, but not all of these things." And so he was asking John, could you give us access to those things? And of course, this would be voluntary. We'd love to have. And John was like, "Oh, absolutely. Sure. We'll absolutely give that to you." Now, you saw at the beginning of the top of this podcast that Patsy and John were saying something to the effect of, "Oh, they didn't even, police bungling. They didn't even want to, they didn't even ask us for our clothes until they didn't even ask us what we were wearing. We had to look back at photos to remember what we were wearing, because they didn't even ask us for our clothes." Yeah, but why didn't you give them your clothes? Why didn't you give them the record? You knew that you were going to need it, but you wouldn't know that they would need that now, would you, if you're hiding behind some lawyers? Now, would you? Because you wouldn't know what the police need because you haven't talked to them. It took you 4 months to talk to the police, so you wouldn't know what the police need. They haven't had a chance to ask you anything. You had 4 months to escape, so how would they have communicated that to you? Oh, it took them a while, and by that time we had forgotten. Yeah, at least 4 months, because, and then even, that was in 1997. Even in 1998, in June of 1998, you still hadn't turned that stuff over. They had to come ask you for it. They had to come beg you for it. You sound like Susan Stein. Knowing what the cops want, knowing what the cops need. You know the cops came over looking for your son's DNA, and you saw that they mishandled or misused the DNA. And instead of coming and tracking him down and going to the police station the next day and saying, I don't think you collected my son's DNA correctly, we just want him cleared. Is there anything that we can do to help? We may have caught you off guard. Maybe it's not that you did a bad job. We may have just caught you off guard. And we want to make sure that we provide our son's DNA so he can be cleared. So this can kind of help you with the investigation. Can we do that? Oh, Miss Stein, I thank you so much for coming by and doing that. You know, with this investigation, we are running a small team. And so with this investigation, we're kind of overwhelmed, but, you know, we're putting in a lot of hours. So it just, you know, sometimes we do kind of get lost and everything. So I appreciate your honesty and your integrity and coming by. That's what you should have done. But you didn't. You just watched him go off and make a mistake and be like, oh, I wonder. And John gonna say, I wonder if that's going to affect the case so many years later. If it is, then go give him your DNA. You can go give him DNA right now. Go give it to him. What's stopping you? Just walk up to the police station and be like, hey, I'd like to turn in my DNA for Doug Stein for my blood and hair samples so you can put that in with your forensics. Can I do that? I'd love to do that. You could do that now. What's stopping you? And maybe he's done it by this point. I don't know what he's done. But from what it seems as if Doug and Burke are withdrawn from society. And less so, Doug, obviously, you know, Doug is doing his thing, not trying to, you know, talk down on him. But I'm just saying, this is something that could be turned in. Why isn't it? If it isn't. And if you know that the cops are going to be looking for your phone records and your credit card bills, don't you want to ask and say, hey, here's my phone records and credit card bills? What you call it? Man, and I didn't get to see it. I wish I really could find, there was a Peter Boyle show that I saw discussed in the in some of the forums that kind of really talked about the fact that Peter had access to the phone records at the time, or some of them at the time. And he said some of the things were crossed out. I think they said that there was a call from Mike Bynum. There was a call to Mike Bynum early before the 911 call. And that's speculation because I don't have any proof for that. So I'm speculating because I don't have any proof for that. So that's why I say that. So I don't know, but that's what the forums were talking about. But anyways, my point here is saying is that in my notes it says, why didn't the police have access to all of the records at this point, especially in 1998? Why didn't the police have access to this at this point, to all the records prior to the grand jury? These are key details to help move the investigation along. It seems as if there was a picking and choosing of what to give up to the police. This had something to do with what DA Hunter would allow. Back in 1996, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, without a subpoena, you would sort of need to get the records, and I think it's the same way now. Without a subpoena, somebody would have to volunteer that. They'd have to give their records voluntarily. And that would mean that the credit card company or the telephone company would send the records to the client, and then the client would have the ability to shift it over to the police. Or now with a subpoena, they could have subpoenaed directly, or they should have been able to subpoena directly to the telephone company and the credit card company, and they could have gotten those records. But from what I understand, according to Steve Thomas, DA Hunter wouldn't put it through. For some strange and odd reason. I do not know. That stuff could have even been revealed. You could have ordered fresh copies at the grand jury, and that could have told us everything we needed to know. That could have pointed us in the right direction for an investigation. So when we talk about bungling, I mean, you got to put the DA in this, because this is wild. So Records had to be obtained voluntarily, and this is what Lou Smith was asking for. Would you please turn that over to us? And John said absolutely in 1998. And so that's not police um, contamination. That's not police bungling, I say here. That's well within John and Patsy's um ability. That's well within their power to accommodate, especially uh, as early as they could have, as well as paying for the DNA, which the BPD had to pay for. You could have paid for more tests, stuff like that. So things that were important to the case could have been done, but they weren't. And this is good here. I'm on track. I'm on track. I believe. Yes. Oh, I need to okay. Sorry. Well, I guess it kind of confirms a little bit that from Fleet's perspective, from his letter, this kind of rejection or interference made it seem as if it made it seem as if the lawyers are really contaminated from Fleet's perspective that the lawyers are really contaminating. That's I'll say it like that. He goes on to say here, yeah, I am on time. Really on time. In the summer of 1998, Steve Thomas, lead detective Steve Thomas, was abruptly quit the force, blasting Hunter in his resignation letter and saying the DA's office had effectively crippled the case. The Whites marked the occasion with a lengthy letter to the people of Colorado detailing their suspicions that the long awaited grand jury had been deliberately delayed for more than 18 months to serve several agendas. They had learned that an obscure new law pushed by the Colorado District Attorney's Council in 1997 allowed a grand jury to issue reports in first-degree murder cases in which an indictment wasn't returned. The reports could even include a public exoneration of the unindicted. That's true. When I was reading it, that's true. But the new law would only apply to juries convened after October of 1997. People interested in obtaining a public absolution of the Ramseys um, would have to get the matter before a jury seated after that date. And so I have here, it mentions how they use the new grand jury rule to keep the full report out of the hands of the people. And then this is what I'll close with. We're going to have a conversation, sort of like an extensive conversation about this. So, Lockheed Martin sold Access Graphics, an asset reportedly valued at around $200 million, to General Electric in late 1997. The grand jury began hearing evidence in the Ramsey case in September of 1998. So, after John Ramsey's, my notes say that after John Ramsey's fall, meaning after what happened with this whole his daughter, after JonBenet died, Access Graphics started to tumble. Is what happened. Access Graphics was no longer worth or even close to being valued at $1 billion. It was sold at a fire sale price of $200 million. And my question becomes this: how could one company lose so much value so fast within a year, essentially, if they were sold in late 1997 and you hit $1 billion in December of 1996? Now, we know that just because you hit $1 billion in sales, that doesn't mean that you're valued at $1 billion. That's just your sales data. That's just your sales revenue. But the fact that this is valued at around 200 million strikes me as odd. I call that a fire sales price. Fire sale price. So your sales were about $1 billion. We can say, based on what we read and what we talked about, we can say that it's possible, we know the margins weren't big, that it's possible, let me make sure my math is correct, that your margin was about 15%. We're going to estimate at about 15%. Your markup of your profit margin was about 15%. So in that case, your gross profit would be about $150 million. We do 15% times $1 billion. If I'm remembering my math correctly, I wrote all this down before. It's possible that your cost of goods sold would be maybe about 850 million, because like I said, you don't have a lot of you don't have a lot of markup. If that's the case, cost of goods sold is probably about 850 million, because you're not creating anything. You're just redistributing. That's it. So you probably cost you $850 million to get the computers, and sell them and do all of that. But you net $1 billion. So it's just really, you're just moving computers. It's a volume is what it is at this point. So if computers wholesale to access for say $150, you buy each computer about $150. Resell it and then you resell at a 15% markup for about $172.50. Then you probably sell about 5.7 million computers. And so your profit after, say, your SG&As would be like your salaries, company upkeep. You had multiple campuses and stuff like that. Your company upkeep, advertising and distribution fees, et cetera, things like that. Your profit after SG&A, you probably dedicate, of your gross profit, you probably dedicate 100 million to all of your SG&A and all of that stuff, salaries and all such as that, and campus upkeep and all those. You probably have about $50 million is what I say. Okay. So then you take 10% of that for interest. Maybe you got loans and stuff like that. Maybe you got loans or whatever. Take 10% of that and give you $5 million in interest that you're going to have to pay on those loans and stuff, whatever. So you probably take 50 million minus 5, and that's going to be 50 million minus your $5 million in interest. So that's going to leave you with a profit of about $45 million. If the tax rate is about 35%, check my math. If the corporate tax rate is about 35%, you do 35% times, or 0.35 times 45. That's what I'm doing. You get 15.75 million. Check my math. Your net income, where you're going to have $50 million in your profit. Net income is going to be your $50 million minus your $5 million in interest, minus your $15.75 million in taxes, and you end up with somewhere around $29.5 million. Check my math on that. So the assumed book value, if we look at the assumed book value, we don't have the balance sheet or anything. So if we look at the assumed book value, including the cash that you have here, the 29 million and stuff like that. So we're assuming here you have your cash, your assets, and your physical holdings. We might assume that you have about $300 million in tangible assets. And I'm getting somewhere here because you sell at $200 million. John Ramsey built a huge company, but it was sold at $200 million. And I'm doing this to kind of show the damage, in a way, really the damage that this whole JonBenet case caused, or was brought to Lockheed Martin, and how you can build value into something, but if your business is kind of wonky, then it's brought to naught. If your business is wonky, I'm not suggesting that it is, but I'm saying if it is the case that your business is kind of wonky. I just got done watching a show called American Gangsters, and really it's about women who committed all kinds of fraud and stuff like that, and they're kind of showing how they did it and stuff like that, and just the different ways, the different hustles to defraud the system and whatnot. So while these women raised millions of dollars, it's really inspiring to see how the human mind works. While these women raised millions of dollars, once the feds caught on, basically all of the money that they made, millions of dollars, all the money that they made went down. You're essentially at zero. You go to jail, you come out, you have nothing. So it's like all that you did, stressing your body out, came back to zero. Nobody's figured out how to hide the money and keep the feds away from it. I remember, man. Look, I remember a friend of mine, mentioning something or another to me. He was mentioning something. If I can't remember, but I remember having a conversation with somebody. Maybe it was a friend of mine, maybe it was somebody else. But I remember having a conversation with somebody, and they were talking about, you can get around the cops this way. You get around the cops this way. I said, look, you ain't been to school with the boys I've been to school with. These boys make it their mission to find you. They won't let it go. They will use whatever resource that they can use to track you down. Because they detest that you're trying to trick them. They don't like that. And especially them boys that you got some of these people that just nerd out on accounting and forensics and finance. And if they got a reputation to uphold and they built a reputation and they going to let somebody like you, somebody off the street, come in and trick them, they don't like that. They will hunt you down. I said, be careful. I'm not saying that you're not smart, and I'm not saying that you're intelligent, but these boys will hunt you down. And so essentially, you had these young ladies who committed these crimes and they lost all the money. And so what I'm saying, and it's gonna come to naught if your money is funny, if your business is funny. And so what I'm saying here is that, something that, looking at the physical holdings and the tangible assets, should have been valued at about $300 million. They sold it for 200. It should have been valued at about 300. That's just the tangible part. Intangibly, we assume, because of things like fast growth and the value, we can kind of look at the value. I think we read an article earlier on in our investigation. I don't have it with me, and it's probably somewhere in my files. But we read an article on the fact that Lockheed Martin purchased Access Graphics for about $150 million. So you at least have some sort of value of 150, right? That they're putting on you. There's some sort of intangible value in there that's appreciating everything that you're doing, because I think John had took it over and ran it up just a little bit. So they purchased them for about 150, right? When I think they were still at 16. So John ran it up and they got their money back. You shoot, if I purchase it for 150 and you take me to $1 billion in sales, oh yeah, I'm getting a good ROI. I'm getting a good return on my investment. And so I estimate intangibly that they're worth about $200 million just for the fast growth. So if you take the $300, and that's intangibly, so if you and not only intangibly because of the fast growth, but you also consider government backing, right? With the relationships with Lockheed Martin, and you consider the contracts that they have and the things that they have access to, that means something. So I say you got a total market value of about 500 mil at least. So even though you sold $1 billion, you take off 50% and your market value is about 50% of that, of what you sold. That's pretty good. So you're having a conversation, right? Any conversation that we have with GE, if I'm Lockheed Martin, any conversation that we have, we've been killing the game. We're going to start at $500 million. So your total market value is 500 million. But we look at 500 million, what the total market value should have been, less than 200 million that GE paid for it. That's about $300 million in loss of value over a year. Over a year. I am repeating myself. A loss of $300 million in 12 months. We're estimating in 12 months. This company, as fast as it grew, in a year, it tumbled even faster, because when people get in there, and not only is the problem with this whole thing around John Ramsey and his daughter, they don't like that. Investors don't like that. But it's also somebody may have brought attention to the books and said, oh, wait. You don't expect us to be, come on. You don't expect us to pay for this, do you? You're shoving $1 billion in my face, and you're telling me this guy just really, was killing the game. Come on, man. Look at this. These numbers are hiding in plain sight. And so the value should have been 500 million, but the sales price was 200 million. You get a $300 million loss divided by 12. That's about losing about 25 million each month. And you have to think that some of that had to do with John. Possibly. I'm just spitballing here. But $25 million loss per month. Check my math. 300 million divided by 12. 25 million, about 25 million a month is going out the door. So Lockheed, they still gained about $50 million on the sale, because if they bought it for 150 and they sold it for 200, they still gain about $50 million on the sale, but they should have gained 350 million. But because of the fiasco, they lost they should have gained about 350 million. So they lost 300 of that 350 due to the fiasco and ended up with only $50 million. So they put in all that work to back Access Graphics and build them up and get a huge return. And the only return, they spent all those resources. I might suspect that they spent more than $50 million in their resources. So even if you think about what they spent in their own resources and their own backing to help Lockheed Martin grow, they may have spent more than $50 million. So they actually may have come out of the deal losing money, if you think about it intangibly in that case, or tangibly, depending on how much they put on their books to say, hey, we're trying to get this company up and on the level of a Lockheed Martin company. So they may have spent actually more. And so now, you might actually be looking at a negative. And so that's just interesting to me, because it kind of shows, again, we might be able to see that something starts off hot with John. We could. So keep your eyes open. We could see that the way that things are built up, it starts off hot, it's fast, it's big, but in the end, it comes to nothing. All of the smoke and mirrors, let's say that all of the smoke and mirrors might come to naught in this case. That's everything I have. Appreciate you all for watching, liking and sharing, subscribing. I want to send a special thank you out to each and every one of you who like and share and comment. Each week when I get weekly metrics, and each week when I look at my metrics, I think on average my shares are about 35 shares a week, and that's fine by me. I'm, you don't have to do anything, but last week my shares were at about 94, 90, almost tripled, what it's been in the past. And I was like, man, they really rock with me, man. They really share my stuff, man. And I appreciate that, because, it's probably something small to you guys, probably not a big deal, but I appreciate that, man, because you're looking at my investigation and you kind of care about my investigation. And I feel like, not only the monetary contributions that I really appreciate you guys, taking out of your heart and taking out of your pocket, to donate to me, but also sharing my content, man. I appreciate that. I really do. And because you don't have to do that, you don't have to watch my stuff, but I appreciate you for doing that, and sharing my stuff and being active in doing that and really saying, hey, man, I enjoy this. Hey, so and so, you need to watch this, or hey, so and so, you need to watch this. So, I really appreciate that, man. So I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for engaging in the comments and discussing and stuff like that and giving me ideas and whatnot. And I'll let that be it. But until next time, as I always say, take care of yourself, look after yourself, make sure you're doing well. And until next time, take it easy.